In this video we rack up more numbers for our big year, we look for some scarcer British birds, and we go searching for Britain's most colourful seabird. This adventure began with a trip northeast towards Cleveland. Our drive was reasonably uneventful until we got about 10 minutes away from where we were staying the night. Then...
what just happened?
We got pulled over by the boys in blue. Turns out we had a couple of lights out, like our registration plate light and a brake light on. Anyway, so we're going to
checking absolutely everything.
You have to do the tyres and the coolant and everything. Anyway, tomorrow we're going to have a small break in birding to go and find some light bulbs from a Halfords. About 10 minutes up the road later. Hey folks, after our incident with the police, we're now parked up in South Gare, which is just the other side of the Tees estuary from Middlesbrough. It's a bit breezy, the van's rocking. There was a redneck grebe yesterday, so we're hoping to find that tomorrow. Then on to Saltholm, RSPB to see what's there, and then hopefully on to Bampton tomorrow evening and Sunday morning to get some seabirds for our year list. And let's see what else there is about as well.
Also, we've got to Google the Halfords.
We're going to Google our Halfords to get some bulbs. We may have an hour out of our birding day tomorrow to try and fix our issue and hopefully not get pulled over on a police record. Anyway, stick with us and see if that happens again. See you in the morning. Night night. We woke up to an overcast and pretty blustery day. I got up early and had a bit of a walk while Kaylee was getting ready. It was pretty early, but the Tees estuary was bursting with bird life. Morning folks, I'm at South Gare, which is on the Tees estuary, not far from Middlesbrough area. We're here hopefully to try and find a red-necked grebe, but after a little bit more research as Kaylee was getting ready this morning, it favours the other side of the estuary, so we may go and have a look for that shortly. On the dilapidated old wooden fishing pier there were birds perching, mostly cormorants, but there were also a few gulls as well. Out on the estuary itself and reasonably close in, there was a good number of common scouter. This first flock being a mix of males and females, and the second two that were really close in were two preening females. It was nice to see these sea ducks where they weren't just black dots in the distance. There were a few birds that were flying in and out, like this oyster catcher which passed the shore quite close in, and just coming into shore, here's some blurry distant footage of a bird which was the first I'd seen this year, a swallow. This is a sure sign of spring. Wandering along the headland towards the lighthouse, there was quite a lot of birdsong, most of it coming from linnet. These birds were in a flock that were flying back and two. I did pick out this beautiful male that was very red fronted, sat on a rock singing away. As I wandered further down the headland, I felt I was being watched. It turns out I was. This lovely seal followed me for quite a while, then disappeared out of sight into the murky water. I carried on as far as I could go down the path, and right at the end I spotted a shape in the water which turned out to be a red-throated diver. This was an adult that was nearly in breeding plumage. It had a really grey neck, but it didn't quite have all the red on the front. It was really close in and seemed reasonably oblivious to my presence. It stuck around for quite a while. I looked away and then looked back and it somehow had vanished. Pleased with what I'd seen so early in the morning, I headed back to the van to see if Kaylee was up and about yet, and to try and look for the red-necked grebe that we were here for. When I got back to the van, Kaylee was already up and about and scanning the sea. Unfortunately, the only grebe she could find was this great crested grebe. After a short chat with another birder, we found out the red-necked grebe had been seen that morning a little further down the path, so we followed him and had a look. There was a little area by some fishing shacks, looking over the area of the estuary where the red-necked grebe had been seen. We were scanning quite a large area, and neither us nor the other birder could pick out the red-necked grebe. After disappointingly giving up and heading back to the van, The other birder ran after us. He'd seen the redneck grebe and pointed it out. It was reasonably at a distance, but this was definitely the bird we'd been looking for. And also the first one I'd ever seen in adult plumage. This species is a rare breeder in the UK with only about 20 resident pairs. Numbers do increase a little in the winter, but it's a pretty scarce bird, which made this sighting ever more pleasing. We didn't stand for too long watching it because it was so cold. We got in the van, warmed up and headed to our next stop. This meant driving through a very industrialised area of Middlesbrough. Hello everybody, we're at RSPB Saltholm. We're looking for a couple of birds, little ring plover being one of them. Another spring visitor for our year list. Also, they've had a white-fronted goose that apparently lives here and doesn't migrate.
We've seen San Martins.
We've already seen San Martins, which I'm going to need footage of because they were quite tricky. So I'm going to have another try in a bit. So stick with us, let's see what we find. RSPB Saltholm is a reserve we've been to a few times now, and I'm kind of warming to it more every time I go there. We were initially put off by its surroundings with heavy industry visible all around us, but the staff are great, the shop and cafe are brilliant, and there's always some great birds here. And when we got to the first hide, there was hundreds of black-headed gulls. Although this species are raucous and loud, it's great to see them in large numbers here. As for the last couple of years, this species here has been really badly affected by bird flu. And it looks like so far this year that problem may have gone. Fingers crossed. Other birds on the water here included Canada geese and great crested grebe. This handsome individual preening in front of us. A little further out, some other birders in the hide spotted a few waders. These turned out to be two rough and one knot that were flying around in a group. We didn't stick around at this hide for too long because we had to make a move to the Saltholm pool hide. This is where we were hoping to see little ringed plover. When we arrived, this species were not immediately visible, so we checked out what else was around. There was plenty of action from some of the ducks like this shoveler, and scanning round the banked area between the pools, I saw this teal which was accompanied by a lapwing. The noisy black-headed gulls were on this pool too, some of them shouting and displaying, and others peacefully sat on nests. Other birds around us sat on nests did include the lapwings. This species are viciously territorial, and any bird that got close was hastily chased away. We searched and searched for our little ring plover through other groups of birds like these widgeon. Eventually I did spot a small wader flying around and running up and down, and this was our little ringed plover. This species is a personal favourite of Kaylee's. She fell in love with it the first time we visited Saltholm, where one came really close to the hide on a mud bank. This individual today didn't come quite as close, unfortunately, but we had reasonable enough views as it ran up and down the grassy islands in the pool. This species first bred in the UK in 1938. The numbers have slowly increased since then, but it's by no means a common bird and is a Schedule 1 red-listed species. One surprise that another birder pointed out was this white wagtail that was feeding on the grass bank between the pools. This species, or should I say subspecies, is closely related to our pied wagtail that we get in Britain. There are some distinct plumage differences between the two subspecies. The pied wagtail is black on its back, whereas the white wagtail is lighter grey. The white wagtail is more commonly seen on the continent, but does visit the UK on passage. Unfortunately, with it being a subspecies, I can't count it on our year list. Boo! After successfully finding our little ring plover, we scanned the pools again, hoping to pick out our other target bird, which was a white-fronted goose. This bird apparently had been present for a while, but it moved all around the reserve and neighbouring areas, so not always an easy bird to find. And unfortunately for us, we couldn't, and headed back down the path towards the van, stopping en route to look at this lovely stoat which crossed our path. This animal is far from easy to get footage because they usually keep hidden
and when they're not, they move fast. Regardless, it was great to see and one of the highlights of the day. As we headed back towards the van down the path, we stopped to have a quick look at these barnacle geese and then wandered along the boardwalk to another birder that appeared to be looking in a tree. We inquired as to what he was looking at or looking for, and it turned out it was a whitethroat. This bird was singing quite loudly, but unfortunately not showing very well, generally being in the back of the bushes. Regardless, I was able to get a little bit of footage of it through the leaves, enough to get a positive identification. And another bird for the year list. Super. Whilst we were looking at this bird, the other birder present flippantly just said, "Oh, if you're interested, there's a white-fronted goose in that field." At this point, Kaylee was sat on a bench with her back to the goose, not realising that her intended quarry, a lifer for her, was in the field almost directly behind her. This species do not breed in the UK. We get wintering birds or birds on passage that either breed in Greenland area or Siberia. This individual apparently was a visitor from Russia. It was happily feeding in a field with some Canada geese. What a great addition to our year list, and a lifer for Kaylee.
Hey folks, success, I would say.
Absolutely.
We've got the little ring plover, which is great, and we got our target species, which was the white-fronted goose. A very helpful gentleman pointed it out to us, which was basically sat behind where Kaylee was sat on a bench. So anyway, that was great. That's a lifer for Kaylee. Woo! So yeah, some great species for the year list. Now we're going to head all the way to Bempton Cliffs, which is a couple of hours, so stick with us.
As we got back to the visitors centre, before we went to the van, I tried to get a little bit of footage of their sand martin wall, with some sand martins coming in and out of nest holes. These birds are usually quite early to return from Africa, and we were told that these ones had been here for 3 weeks already. Following a very successful morning, we headed a couple of hours south down the coast towards RSPB Bempton Cliffs.
Hey folks, we're here at Bempton Cliffs and it's windy. You can tell by the angle of my beard. We're parked up and we're going to go and see what we can see. Some more birds for the year list. Stick with us.
When we arrived, it was mid-afternoon and still quite breezy here too. Regardless, we headed out into the reserve, hoping to pick up some more species for our year list. The first of these species being the tree sparrow, that are unusually common around this reserve, and also a personal favourite of mine. We wandered down towards the cliff's edge, hoping to see some of the seabirds that this reserve is famous for. It has a huge colony of gannets here, but also is home to razorbills, guillemots, kittiwakes, fulmars, and also a really colourful bird, both in colour and attitude, the puffin. Upon arrival at the viewpoint, we looked down towards the ever-growing colony of gannets. Some early arrivals had already found nest sites, but more will arrive over the coming weeks, and these will have to fight over areas for nesting. Gannets are Britain's largest seabird. This species breeds in the UK and winters in the Bay of Biscay off the coast of Spain, with some continuing as far as West Africa. The UK itself is extremely important for the gannet population, with 2/3 of the world population breeding off the coast of Britain. Many of the individuals here were courting partners and building nests, with their mating displays being particularly entertaining. These birds mate for life and generally go to the same nest year on year. Peeling ourselves away from watching gannets, we scanned to see what other species we could find on the rocks around us. One particular species is the kittiwake. This bird is in the gull family and breed around the UK on cliff edges like this. This species is unfortunately in decline around the UK, possibly due to the shortage of its favourite food, sand eels. Thankfully here we noticed quite a number of pairs, so hopefully here their population remains stable. Another very entertaining bird that breeds here is a member of the auk family, and it's the very sleek looking razorbill. These smart looking birds breed on the cliff edges here and are flying in and out, feeding and building nests. Not only are these birds very smart looking, but they're reasonably entertaining to watch as they fly in, waddle around and sometimes bicker with each other. Another species of auk here, which appears to be most people's favourite, is the colourful and charismatic puffin. This black and white species has a large multicoloured beak and eye that looks like it's clown makeup. There were a handful of pairs here visible, some displaying building nests and some billing, which was not only entertaining but very, very cute. This species is widespread through the North Atlantic, although 90% of the population being in Europe and 60% being in Iceland. And although the population being reasonably large and widespread, it is declining rapidly, making this species certified vulnerable on a global scale. Let's hope this population trend stabilises and we get to see these beautiful birds for many years to come. This nature reserve is a real feast for the senses, with the noise and the smell and the sights, and for us not an easy place to leave, yet we had to go to our overnight destination, so we left all the seabirds behind, the puffins, razorbills and guillemots, and headed back towards the car park and the tree sparrows, and finally our van, as we had to move on. Hello from me, Kaylee, and the ducky. We've just got this for Emily because she loves duckies.
Gonna love this ducky.
Bampton Cliffs was great. We've got a few birds for our year list, including puffin, razorbill, kittiwake, tree sparrow. What else did we get? I'm sure we got something else as well. Gannets, of course.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely excellent. Apparently there was a ring ousel here, but we couldn't find it and hadn't been seen for a while. So back to the drawing board with that one. But so far we've had an excellent day. It's not quite dark yet. We're going to head about an hour and a half down the coast towards one of our favourite spots in the East Riding of Yorkshire, Spurn, and see if we can get half an hour before it goes dark, and then resume in the morning. Stick with us. Our final stop of the day was an hour and 20 minutes away in Spurn. Hey folks, we've made it. I don't know if you can hear me because it's still pretty windy here. We've made it to Spurn, which is one of our favourite places, and you'll probably see quite a lot this year. Yeah. So we're going to have a quick look at Canal Scrape Hide before it goes dark to see if there's anything there, and then we're going to have to make some dinner because we're starving. Stay with us. Although the afternoon was coming to a close, there was still some light left, so we headed to Canal Scrape Hide, where someone earlier that day had spotted bearded tits. When we arrived, there was a pigeon roosting. We tried not to disturb it as we went into the hide and looked over the pool. Unfortunately, it was hard to see anything as the light was so low. There were some silhouettes around the pool, like this little grebe, but not too much more. So we headed back out into the wind. It wasn't only us battling the wind, this poor magpie was struggling to keep its tail down. Despite the wind, it was a lovely evening walking through the fields past these very large cattle. There were a few birds present, but most were heading to roost. So we headed towards the mud flats in front of the Crown and Anchor pub to see if there were any waders there, as the tide was out. We passed the churchyard on the way with these beautiful bluebells, and on the estuary there were some waders, but not many. Most of them were redshank. We watched them as the sun went down. This was strangely hypnotic, watching the orange glow disappear over the horizon, with the wind blowing over the mud flats that were coloured gold by the disappearing sun. It was now definitely time for a pint, and what better place than the Crown and Anchor? Well-deserved pint, I think. The following morning we woke up to a reasonably clear day, although still windy. As Kaylee was getting ready, I had a quick walk down the lane and through some of the fields just to see if there was anything about early. There weren't too many birds, but there was certainly this hare This individual was ducking in the grass and hopping around a bit. One bird that was in the same field with this pheasant, which looked like it had only just woken up. A couple of other animals, again not birds, was the deer. There's quite a good population of deer here. This one I spooked and it stood and watched me for a while, and a bit further down the lane I saw this other deer, which appears to have lost the bottom of one of its hind legs. Regardless, it seemed to be getting around reasonably okay, although I do wonder what had actually happened. As I walked back towards the van and Kaylee, I did see these two pink-footed goose fly over me. Morning all, we're at Kilnsea, just down the road from Spurn, and we're just about to head to Spurn to Canal Scrape to see hopefully bearded tits. Somebody saw some yesterday and also apparently this morning. They're pretty elusive, but it's worth certainly a look. Stick with us. Before leaving, I had a wander around the car park just to see what birds are around here, as there was lots of song. The first bird I found was this pied wagtail. Other birds present on the car park included a few singing goldfinch, like this beautiful individual that was on top of a bush. The most numerous bird by far was the starling, and these were making quite some racket. I did spot a few of these birds collecting nesting material too. After a few inquiries with other birders, we figured out exactly where the bearded tits had been seen that morning and the previous day. We wandered up on a bank that overlooked a reed bed at the back of Canal Scrape Hyde. En route, spotting this marsh harrier that was silhouetted against the sky. This area of reeds is quite large, so I didn't hold a massive amount of hope. We scanned for ages, picking out birds such as this reed bunting, but nothing that looked like a bearded tit. These birds are notoriously shy and difficult to find. After a while of scanning and hoping for the best, two birds flew out of the reed bed and landed, and I was able for a very short time to pick out the male, and it was a bearded tit. This beautiful species, sometimes called the bearded reedling, has a very distinctive plumage. Although secretive, they've got about 100 breeding sites in the UK, but still not an easy bird to see. And due to this, we were super happy to get this one on our year list. Being over the moon with this, we headed back towards the van and a few minutes round the corner to Kilnsea Wetlands.
Hey folks, it's a little bit breezy. We just got success
With the bearded tit.
with the bearded tit. It showed intermittently and I got a little bit of footage of it. What a beautiful pair of birds to see her. We're now at Kilnsea Wetlands to see if we can find anything else. Stick with us.
Being greeted as we walked in by this flying grey heron that was really battling the wind. Eventually it decided not to land and flew towards the sea. Whilst walking along the path, we were very pleased to see this peacock butterfly, the first one we'd seen this year. When we arrived at the Hyde, looking over the water, it was reasonably quiet. There were a few birds flying around in and out, the first being this group of grey-lag geese. We had a flyover from this little egret, which eventually landed out of sight. There was a few birds which left while we were there, like this group of huge mute swan, who made a right racket taking off. They eventually made it into the air and flew away from the reserve, looking oddly majestic in flight. There were a small number of wading birds on the pools, the most obvious two species firstly being this redshank that was really close in feeding, the other one being the groups of avocet. These beautiful black and white waders with their distinctive thin upturned bills were feeding in groups in front of us. The water was reasonably high due to recent rain, so they were up to their tummies, feeding and sometimes bickering amongst each other. There was a cormorant sat on a post, drying off, obviously after being in the water, and in front of the Hyde there was a couple of small birds. After investigation, these turned out to be meadow pipits. There was a couple of them wandering round in the high grass, presumably trying to pick out insects. We left the area and wandered back towards the van. It was very quiet at Kilnsea, so we're heading back towards Spurn to see if there's any waders in, because it's pretty much coming to high tide. Our plan was to head towards the beach to see if any of the waders had come close to the shore with it coming to high tide. When we arrived, there were plenty, most being dunlin and knot, and a few grey plover amongst them. As we scanned along, we did see some other species too, including oyster catchers and curlews. As the tide came in further, the flocks of waders took off all at once and followed each other almost like a synchronized display, occasionally landing and then taking off again. This was amazing to watch and quite a spectacle. These birds would break off into smaller groups and attempt to land on whatever little bits of grass and mud hadn't been claimed by the high tide. Although this spectacle was stunning to watch, we did not find any new species for our year list. So, by now, with it being late morning and us not having breakfast yet, we thought it was about time to get a little bit of food and a cup of tea.
A lovely walk down the front of Spurn where it was high tide, so there was loads and loads of waders, which was ace to see. No new species unfortunately, but we've got great views of grey plover, dunlin, curlew and some brenkies too. I think it might be breakfast time.
We relaxed for a short while with our refreshments and then decided to go and have one last look at the canal scrape. As we walked towards the hide, we spotted our friend the pigeon that was roosting there the previous night. It was now sitting on the gravel chilling out in the sun. As we got to the hide, we were greeted by a few birds on the water. The first was this coot that was feeding right up against the near bank of the pool. We did spot again the little grebe that we'd seen the previous night, although it didn't stay above water for very long. And on one side of the pool against the bank there was this little egret that seemed to be looking for its breakfast. Whilst we were watching these birds, I heard a sound that I recognised. It was a sedge warbler. That would be a new bird for our year list. So, as we had about 20 minutes before we left, we headed up the bank again to where the bearded tits had been seen. This is where the sedge warbler's sound appeared to be coming from. Regardless of how loud it was, I really struggled to find it, searching in the reeds and the bushes. Eventually, I picked out a little shape that just moved for a second. It was our sedge warbler. This bird, a spring visitor, was singing at the top of its voice from the middle of a bush. I managed to just about see its head, but that was about the extent of what I could see. Regardless, another new bird for our year list. It had been an incredible weekend, with not only 13 new species for our year list, but also a lifer for Kaylee with the white-fronted goose. We'd really enjoyed ourselves. I hope you enjoyed the video too. Please like,
Please subscribe.
and please press the notification bell.
Bye.
See you next time.